everyone, welcome back to the Black Label Mindset podcast. We are diving straight into it tonight, and we're joined with a fantastic guest. Dr. Tom Lovell from the Penrith Panthers is with us tonight. Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, mate. What I'm going to do to get the wheels turning and to give everyone listening a bit of an insight and an understanding of who you are and what you do, can I throw it straight over to you? And can you tell everyone who you are, who you work with, and the type of people that you train?
I will for sure, mate. But before I answer that, I actually just want to say I really admire what you're doing here, and you're working hard to change people's lives, and the path you've taken with this podcast is something I really congratulate you for, mate.
Thank you, mate. That's very, very kind of you to say. Those of you who obviously won't know this, Dr. Lovell is a close friend of mine, so it's lovely to have him here. And in the same way that the admiration goes both ways there, because what you've done and what he's done is very impressive, and I'm very, very grateful that you're doing this. So, mate, thank you for that. Let's dive in, mate. For those people who don't know you as well as I do, who are you? What do you do? And who do you work with?
Yeah, so you mentioned I work with the Penrith Panthers. My role there is head of performance. So the role I have is essentially I'm responsible for the team's performance, and that is not only their athletic performance, but also their mental preparation for games, their recovery, their nutrition, ensuring they're in the best possible shape they can be in order to perform on the weekend. So that's hopefully a good summary, yeah.
I do just want to highlight as well, before we go any further today, Tom is probably the most modest and humble person on the planet, and I want to highlight that, and I don't want to get you into any strife with Ivan, but since you joined the Panthers team, coincidence? I don't think so. You started winning, especially grand finals. We're going to touch on that a little bit later in the podcast, but I just want to highlight the level of academic we have with us today. I guess the point of this podcast is largely to discuss mindset techniques and hacks that we can all use that help us on a daily basis, whether it be inspire ourselves or get fit or get healthy or just increase that intellectual architecture that we all seem to struggle with. And I want to pick your brain today, and I think this is going to be such a pivotal, impressive podcast because the stuff that you know, I think is going to help a lot of people listening. So I want to kick things off and start with asking the question, how can everyday people or everyday athletes apply the same high-performance principles that you do with your players on a daily basis in order to improve their own health and well-being?
Yeah, sure. So I think rugby league is an interesting story because it's in the recent history where rugby league actually turned into a professional sport. So back in the late 90s, when rugby league turned into a professional sport, players and clubs and coaches had to decide how to spend their time. Prior to that, guys would have full-time jobs. Some of the most famous players in history would turn up to training after working a full day of work to train for 2 hours at night. These days, as full professionals, They struggled in the early years trying to figure out how they would fill a day full of training, or what would they do with their days now they were full-time professionals. So part of our role is, yes, they're going to train for 2 hours on the field. They might do some other training in and around that. But then how are they going to spend the other 20, 21 hours every day to become a professional athlete and to get the most out of themselves? So it's not necessarily anything too complicated, but the mindset around being a 24-hour athlete is something that we've really strived to work towards over the last few years. So yes, they need to come and train really hard when they're at work, but how are they recovering from that training and how are they preparing for subsequent training sessions? That is probably where we like to see ourselves set apart from other teams.
So is it more sort of, I guess, using that old analogy, train smarter, not harder?
Our guys train very, very hard, and that is definitely the foundation of improving performance and the foundation of being a successful team. We like to train smart as well.
Yeah, of course.
So it's definitely a balance.
Okay. Are there any, talking on the mindset around that, are there any psychological things that are predictive? Any patterns and ways that your players approach being trained that the everyday athlete can improve on in order to enhance mobility, longevity, and their own training modules? Like, are there any traits that you clearly see as their high-performance coach that sets either, there might be one or two players in particular that you see that sets them apart from everyone else, that they have, that when they approach the training, the games, and the recovery, that we can actually take away from?
So being a team sport, it's fairly unique in the sense that, yes, you can have amazing players, but ultimately the team's success will hinge on how well those players fit together as a team. That might not be as relevant for you, but it's definitely an important piece of the puzzle of, like, if we're recruiting players, are we recruiting good people who are going to fit together? But in terms of like an individual trait or characteristic that we would look for in a player, when we're recruiting players, we look for players with grit and good character. There's been interesting studies in talent identification over the years where they look to assess grit in young soccer players, and they give them impossible tasks to achieve, such as like an old piggy in the middle game, and literally just look at how long they persist in that task before giving up. So that is definitely a trait that has some longevity. It doesn't really change much with age, and that could be a predictor of talent. So things like grit, having a really strong character, are definitely things that are going to set professional athletes apart from guys who don't necessarily make it to that level.
Yeah, right. There's definitely something in that. We certainly see on our programs here where it's the people who just understand that the hard work actually isn't very glamorous. And I think there's a misconception about, I feel that a lot of people look at, obviously your players are very different because it's their source of income and they're professionals. But I think the everyday athlete seems to look at training a bit like the Rocky montage clip, you know, where it's that heavy motivating music in the background and it's kind of only 2 minutes worth of work in order to win. And that grit that you talk about is, I think, something that a lot of people struggle to accept and understand, that you do need to roll your sleeves up when it comes to not just the hard work, but also things outside of fitness and training, you know, that really apply to everyone's daily mindset, whether it be in their career, their relationships, their finances, whatever it might be, that it does require that level of grit.
Just, there's a saying, like an interesting saying that we use is, everyone can perform when the bright lights are on. You know, when, like, we're sitting here with bright lights at the moment, but imagine bright lights in a stadium. Everyone can work as hard as possible and perform at their best when the bright lights are on. But what about when the lights are off? You know, when the training lights turn off, who is still out in the field doing extras on the field? When the bright lights are off and they're at home, what are they eating? How are they recovering? How are they sleeping? How are they preparing for the next day when the lights are off? That's the most important thing, not when the lights are on.
Well, this brings me to be honest, the main reason I wanted to get you on the podcast tonight. And you talk about the success of the players and the team, and the big question that I think we need to spend a little bit of time on, and that I'm very excited to hear the inside of this, is I briefly joked about this at the beginning of the podcast, but you were directly involved in the highest performing team in Australian sporting history. You won 4 grand finals in a row. And the question that I want to ask is, you talk about when the bright lights are on. Now, that's all well and good once, you know, when that hunger is there. And to do it back to back was equally as impressive. To get the three-peat was kind of unheard of, but then to do it 4 times in a row. The question that I want to know is, being on the inside of arguably Australia's highest performing sporting team, how do you get the buy-in year in, year out at that level from each individual player, and not only just the players, but the people behind the scenes, you know, who, much like yourself and Ivan and all the coaching staff, how do you get that buy-in year in, year out to be part of Australian sporting history? Because that is something, that to me is the most impressive thing that the Panthers or any sporting team in Australia have done, is not so much ironically the end result, but that hunger and desire to do it again and again and again. Because it's one thing to say we have the best players, the best community, but the culture is what separates you guys apart. And I'm so fascinated to find out what happened. What were the discussions in the sheds, behind closed doors, as you eloquently just put it, when the lights weren't on?
I'll just start with Ivan. Like, Ivan as a head coach, he's the man behind the success. He openly talks about spending close to 25 years in the game as a player and a coach before he was able to win a premiership. So it hasn't all been success, right? When he won that first one in 2021, there was huge celebrations, but the hunger doesn't dissipate overnight and you can't get sick of losing. So you don't take it for granted. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, if we rewind back to 2019, when Ivan came back to the club, we had a pretty disappointing year. We missed the finals. And it was at that point at the end of the season where the club was looking at a team like the Roosters, who'd just gone back-to-back, and decided that they wanted to strive to be world-class. We viewed Roosters as the world-class team. In other sports, you could look at teams like of the past, like Chicago Bulls or Tiger Woods, or like, what does world-class look like? Currently at the time, that was the Roosters. And it didn't seem all that difficult to conceive that we might be able to be world-class one day. And what were we going to have to do to become world-class? You know, the Roosters down the road, like, it didn't seem impossible that we could become world-class. So then it was all about what are the habits we're going to have to adopt in order for that to happen. 2020, we had a really, really good year, ended up losing the grand final, which really just drove even more hunger, and we wanted to be even better in 2021. And then once we got a taste of success in 2021, then that's what you're referring to in terms of how do you get up for consecutive years to try and want to win again. And I think there's probably two things. One is being world class, and the other is being a source of community pride. The club speaks a lot about when the team's successful, everyone in Penrith walks an inch taller with their chest out because they ride the highs and lows of the team. When the team's doing well, business is thriving. It's a big community out there who really just get around the team. And both of those things, being world class and being a source of community pride, it's not a destination. It's something that you continually have to strive for day in, day out, because if we lose next year, all of a sudden the community, they'll still be proud of us, no doubt, but they much prefer when we're winning, and we do too. So it's easy to continue to be motivated, and they're probably the two biggest things behind it. Yeah.
Right. There's something that for those of you who are listening or potentially watching this, I hope this is being translated, but something that you, Tom, probably can't see and can't attest to is there is so much humility and class to what you're doing and the way that you're describing it. So it's such a testament. Obviously, you being one of Ivan's right-hand men, it is so inspiring to sit here and listen to this because, you know, the fact that you are world-class and that it is, again, I touched on it, it's a part of Australian history now, you know, that there is that still hunger and motivation, which it's incredible. And the thing that I want to touch on very quickly and ask you about that is there are different types of motivation. Obviously, there's the intrinsic and extrinsic, but they both do affect your physical performance and your endurance and, you know, your long-term output. And I think it's an ironically an Australian thing to say, yeah, that's good enough. That done now. And also there's that thing of tall poppy syndrome and people wanting to cut you down. So the long-term plan, how do you guys stay, again, going into 2025 season, motivated, hungry, engaged, to go 5 in a row? Because arguably you are still the favourites to go again. And I can't see any other team out there that would put up an equal fight to stop you. So how do you go into this season now? What's the approach? And I guess what I'm hoping you can allude to here in your answer is how can everyday people tap into a little bit of that hunger and humility?
So I think one of the themes we've used each year has been something Ivan calls 1 in a row. So people are always talking about how are you going to do 5 in a row, but ultimately at the start of this preseason or when the first ball's kicked in March, it's going to be a new trophy up for grabs. Every team starting on 0 points. We've got a new team. We've lost some players. We're going to get some new ones. It's a different squad. And we're looking to get one in a row. And the other trophies are in the cabinet. No one's taking them off us. All we're doing is starting from ground zero and we're going for another trophy, which is one in a row. I think the way that can be translated for your everyday athlete is we're breaking down a bigger goal down into a smaller piece there, right? Into something that's achievable. And you could say, like winning a trophy at the end of the year is a very, very difficult thing to do. So that is an enormous goal, but all we're doing is breaking down the 5 Pete. We're not doing that. We're doing one in a row. And that could be one day in a row. It could be one session in a row. It could be just bringing people back to the present and say this first week of preseason in November, all we want to do is nail this week. And in order for us to nail this week, we need to nail the first day, which starts with the first session. And that's all we'll be focusing on to start the preseason. So, yeah, I think that is pretty relevant for your everyday athlete.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. And again, I think the thing that just is screaming here is just that class humility. It's such a brilliant point that you highlight, because I think too often people can look at something and either look at it as I've done it and the hunger and desire is not really still there. But the fact that you guys are at the highest level and still maintaining that possessive hunger of let's go again, one in a row. It's such a poignant thing to bring up. Being that it is a team sport, and obviously in high performance teams, professional sporting, you are going to be dealing with a couple of egos. How do you align everyone's individual egotistical goals to the team effort?
It's a good question. Obviously, in a team sport, you're going to have a huge range of personalities and characters, and ultimately how they all fit together is the most important thing. Ego is important in terms of we need players to take pride in their individual performance, first and foremost, but ego can be the enemy as well. Like that's well known, and the reason for that is because people start putting their own goals or their own achievements above that of the team. And I think probably the most important point from that perspective is everyone being aligned in terms of where their priorities are. And if their priorities are around teamwork, and we've got some team values that we live by, and if everyone's living by those values, then everyone's putting the team first.
Yeah. If you think in a workplace setting, team sport, there can always be some egos and some strong personalities in professional sport. Is there advice that you can give to everyday people, whether it be people who work in an office or managers or business directors or anything like that, who do have strong personalities in a team? How can the everyday person work more cohesively in a team and align their team towards the group goals rather than individual goals?
I think one of the most important things that we talk about is when the team wins, everybody wins. So yes, everyone's going to have their own individual motivations and their own career path that they're pursuing, and everyone's motivated by different things, whether it be family or money or career trajectory, which is cool. It's the same in footy, and we've got to figure that out in order to tap into that motivation. But when the team wins, everyone wins. So if there's a player who's not doing the best for the team, they're out for themselves, that could be costing the team in terms of their ability to perform at the highest level. And when I say when the team wins, everyone wins, winning makes everyone more valuable, just to take that as an analogy. So my role, all I want for is the team to win. And if that happens, then naturally there's going to be more opportunities for me where people say, oh, he must be a fairly decent head of performance. Or there might be more opportunities for a player who doesn't even play in the top 17. You know, because he's been part of a good club who's been winning, he must understand how to contribute to a team environment. Even if he's not on the field, he's benefiting from the team winning. So as long as everyone's values are aligned like that, and we have values on the wall, and we talk about how to put team before I. As long as everyone's values are being lived and people are putting the team before themselves, then everyone will end up winning at the end of the day.
Yeah, awesome. It almost sounds like that you could look at that and label that under standards. Like, what's everyone's individual standards for the team? And if everyone is pulling in the same direction, then you're all going to go that way. A lot of people prescribe to the idea of visualization and also meditation. And being that you have your doctorate in sports science, I wanted to find out that, firstly, two questions. Do your athletes partake in visualization? And also, as a sports scientist, are there ways that we can optimize the practice of visualization? But more importantly, are there scientifically measurable, tangible effects of visualization that you have studied or experienced?
So, in terms of optimizing visualization, one of the techniques we use for that is by actually framing it as mental rehearsal. So visualization would be you getting into a zone where you're seeing an image in your head about, let's say from a football perspective, you're imagining what it looks like to play a game or a specific moment in a game. Whereas mental rehearsal is not only that, but it's tapping into how it feels, what it smells like, all of the senses to really bring that to life. The idea being is, especially if you're going into an uncomfortable environment, or let's say a new environment or something different or something that you'd like to practice before you get there, it's essentially feeling like you've been there before, and you can bank some reps about maybe how you handle different situations in a game. So it's pretty consistent for us. 2 days before a game during the season, we would do 5 to 10 minutes of mental rehearsal where one of the staff members at Panthers would read through a script to get the players really in the zone to imagine and rehearse that they're there in the game. In a particular scenario, it might be they've just conceded a try or just scored a try, or they're just in a different period of the game where they really just want to zone in and practice mentally what it's like to handle that situation. So they're better at it when they get there in real life.
As far as you touched on something that I think is really relevant, and you said getting in the zone. And athletes talk about this a lot. You know, you'd always seem to hear this in the highlight reels of, I was just in the zone, I couldn't miss. Aside from mental rehearsals and visualization and meditating, can everyday people harness that in a setting that will help them with, whether it be performance anxiety in a work setting or a life setting, whether it might be, stage fright for people who are nervous public speaking, or it might be someone's got a big work presentation, or there's a big event or a big project. How can everyday athletes get in the zone in a way that doesn't require 15, 20 minutes of mental rehearsal, mental preparations, or visualizations? Are there any tips or tricks that you can give us that gets people into that zone quickly?
I think part of being in the zone, if not all of it, is a practice of staying present. So being present is when you're not thinking about the consequences of your actions, you're not worried about the future. You're not thinking about the past in terms of something like a mistake you've made, or even a success you've had, dwelling on that and patting yourself on the back, but literally just being in the present moment in order to perform at your best. There can be a few techniques to get yourself into the present. We've got an awesome story where Dylan Edwards, our fullback, went through a really tricky time in 2019 where he literally just couldn't catch a ball. And he was worried so much about the mistakes he'd previously made. And he was also worried about if he made a mistake, what was going to happen? What were people in the crowd going to be thinking of him? What were people at home going to be thinking about him? Was he going to be dropped? All these things he was worried about. And all he had to do, or it was a challenge, but one of the techniques he used to stay in the present was something as simple as an eye scan across the field, like identifying a few points on the field just to look to, stomp your feet, touch your fingers, something to make you feel or bring you back to the present moment in order to just worry about what the next job was, what's important now. And then he could just concentrate on that without worrying about the consequences, yeah.
Right, so some sort of sensory awareness exercise. I've actually heard of something that you can actually do to help increase mental focus is quite literally stare at something for 2 minutes until you become bored. Your brain activates a whole different, deeper level there. But I want to talk about, on that with Dylan, that sort of, those sort of errors and that sort of mental fatigue must set in after a while in a season. You know, in the same way that when people get to, you know, that time of the year where it kind of becomes October, November, everyone sort of slowly switches off and all those things that we need to do, the to-do lists kind of get pushed back and you're just waiting for the year to end. What can everyday people do where their bodies and minds are being pushed to the limit, but they need to still interact, engage, and function at work on a daily basis? What can they do to get them out of that state of mind? You know, the general population, typical Australians, train at a gym between 3 to 5 times a week. We all get to that stage of the workout where we go, that's enough. How do you find that extra gear consistently to keep going?
I think accountability is a big one. I mean, in a team environment, I know you've got a team of people who train together here in the gym. I'm not sure how aligned their goals are in terms of keeping each other accountable for what they're trying to achieve. But in a team environment, when you've got really strong leaders, not only on the coaching staff, but in the playing group, keeping people accountable tends not to be the biggest challenge. I mean, when you've got strong leadership and there's people keeping other guys accountable, no one's going to quit towards the end of a session. I think in footy, it's lucky because if you're successful, when you get towards the end of the year, that's when the intensity starts going up.
Yeah.
Everyone starts getting excited.
Yeah.
You get even more motivation because you're closer to the end of the year.
Well, winning's addictive.
You're closer to achieving your goals. So I think it might be tied to that in terms of having some goals that you can achieve, not only short term this week, but medium term next month and long term at the end of the year. I think that is probably something that could translate to an everyday athlete. But yeah, it definitely comes down to accountability because players at Penrith, and I'm sure this is the same across the league, they don't want to let their teammates down. They don't want to be that guy. They want to be known as a good teammate. Yeah.
It seems like it's that sense of community, you know, and that's definitely something depending on where you train and depending on what gym you're a part of, that feeling of community and that, not that you're letting other people down, but certainly that support and encouragement plays a really big role for everyday Aussies. And I think that being consciously aware of not always needing to constantly dig so deep, but to have that support unit around you, I think is a really big role. One of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about, which you briefly touched on, you talk about how important the work is, but also how important the rest and recovery is. Can you touch on a couple of things that typical people can do to help recovery? Because you also get to a certain stage in life and a certain age in life as well, where recovery becomes a much bigger priority. So aside from the obvious stretch, drink water, hydrate, what can you advise everyday people to do, being that you are working with these guys and part of their job is to recover? So what can we do that really will help the everyday person get ready for their gym session, for work, for life, for soccer on the weekend with the boys and girls? What can we do?
Well, something you didn't mention was sleep, and that's probably the most important thing. So it's usually in the past been the last thing people think about. You know, once we get to the end of the day, once I've finished answering my last email at midnight, then I might think about, how many hours have I got to sleep now before I need to wake up? Which it's a challenge for everyone, is finding the time to sleep. But being proactive, I mean, with full-time athletes, we can drive this a little bit harder because they don't really have anywhere else to be apart from preparing for training the next day. But in terms of your everyday athlete, I would encourage people to really schedule in sleep time. It's as simple as working out what time you need to wake up, rewinding 8 hours, and that's the time you need to be in bed to try and get to sleep.
Do you track and monitor the cognitive function of your players based around their sleeping patterns?
Sleep has been shown to be beneficial for so many different things, but for athletes, they get sick more, they get injured more, and they don't perform at their peak when they don't sleep well. And that has been proven in lots of different scientific literature, and it's something that we really strive to encourage boys to sleep more. We've changed our training schedule to be later in the morning a few years ago just to help them sleep a little bit longer. Even if they get an extra hour and they're sleeping 8 hours instead of 7, that's what we're striving for our guys, to be prepared to train at an intensity every day.
Do you ever get players who, I guess, tend to reject the idea that they might need as much sleep, or don't prescribe to the idea that I get 8 hours in, and sort of resist that? Or are they a little bit more understanding that being that they're professional athletes and the advice that you give is prescribed as the law?
Yeah, I think there could be instances where guys believe they're sleeping enough when they're not, but ultimately we hope they trust us in terms of looking out for what's best for them. Ultimately, what we said before was, when the team wins, everyone wins, and therefore why wouldn't I be trying to give the best advice to help them be at their best for the team to win? So when everyone knows what they're like after a bad night's sleep, right? Your performance is going to be down. People around you are going to know you didn't sleep well. You're not going to be performing at your best. Your attention is going to fail. Your physical performance isn't going to be at its best. So it's not really a difficult concept to understand that they need to sleep optimally to be able to train at their best, yeah.
Yeah, just on that, with the training, being that you are a world-leading expert in the world of sports science and high-performance athletes, are there any styles of training that everyday people need to be doing more on a day-to-day basis?
For professional athletes who are playing a professional sport, we need to be really specific around their training. But there are two key things that I think are important. One is consistency, and the other is training in a way that's functional, right? So how I would describe that, the exact type of training isn't as important as being consistent with it for a long period of time. Okay, that's where you're going to see the benefits. The second thing is being functional in a way that you aren't pigeonholing yourself in a specific type of training, but you are being broad with your training selection. You're using functional movements that are going to improve your everyday life. And for rugby league players, as an example, when we're in the gym, we use functional movements to help them run better. All right. Here at Black Label, I'm sure you do functional movements which are going to help people in their everyday lives. And that's how I would describe the type of training that I would recommend is consistent and functional.
Now, something that I have to address and credit everyone at the Panthers for is you never really seem to see any of the Panthers boys getting up to any mischief or anything like that. Are there rules when it comes to social media, and are there anything that you encourage the guys to do or not do on social media, based around not just the NRL rules and regulations and that sort of stuff, and obviously the optics of being part of a professional brand, but more so on an individual, personal basis? You know, there are so many studies now about how social media affects grey matter in your brain. There's all sorts of other studies. I mean, you'd know more about that than I would, obviously. But is that something that you discuss with the players?
So we have had a couple of high-profile incidents on social media that were quite negative for the individuals and the club. There was one in 2019, another one in the COVID period, and probably one even recently last year. But like we spoke about already, something like that is not a destination, and it's something that the boys have to continually work on, is to be really intentional about how they use social media if they're going to use it, and be really mindful of the consequences of it. There's some really good stories about guys who want to start focusing a little bit more on their footy, deleting their accounts or putting them on silent so they can't read any messages from fans and things like that. So the guys are very deliberate about how they use it most of the time. You're always going to have a couple of slip-ups here and there, but it is something we definitely focus on. As far as when we have guys at the club, they don't bring their phones out of the change rooms. And that is literally just to help connect with the guys around them.
Yep.
If they've got their phone at the lunch table, they're showing the people on that table that they'd prefer to be connecting with the outside world than the people right in front of them. So that it's definitely something that we pay a lot of attention to in the spirit of teamwork and cohesion. And in terms of staying out of trouble, that's something that's a constant journey that the guys are going on.
Yeah, obviously, being an external observer, like 95% of the rest of the population listening and watching, it does strike me as the Panthers boys just seem like really good blokes. Like they just seem like a very respectful, community-based organisation. And leading into the success, I want to dive into what takes place in, at the halftime mark, and we see it on the TV, and the boys are talking around in that sort of semicircle, and Ivan's leading the charge. What's being said in those moments? What's he saying to them?
One of Ivan's biggest strengths is how calm he is. So he's able to calmly get around to each of the players, allow them, especially the leaders, to have their say and give some input about how they think the team's going. But then he's able to, after collaborating, he's allowed to collect his thoughts and then deliver a really clear message to the team about what the second half looks like. And often that's getting back to phase one. It's about getting back to the most important foundation pieces of the game, rather than just try and start at a million miles an hour again, but really just get back to basics at the start of the second half in order to set the game up again. So yeah, a couple of things there is he allows players to connect and talk and communicate about what's happening, but then ultimately summarise and deliver a collective and calm message.
After the 2020 grand final, where you guys went down to the Storm by 6 points, we've spoken largely today about the immense success that you guys have had. We've loosely touched on some of the losses, and it's taken a substantial amount of time to get there. But I want to try and highlight to the everyday person listening how, in the professional sporting world, can you come back after such a devastating loss like that, pick yourselves up by the bootstraps, and go again to win 4 in a row? So the question I really want to know is, how have you guys cultivated the ability to, after several, as you mentioned earlier, before against the Roosters, several seasons where you've really missed out, to just keep going and keep going and keep going to the point where the culture and community is now of win?
The 2020 grand final really hit hard, the loss. We experienced such a successful year that year. We had something like 17 wins in a row leading into the grand final where we lost. But the most important thing was that we took some really valuable lessons out of that game. So when the boys returned for pre-season, most of them sat down in the theatre and watched the game in full and reviewed the game quite hard and understood where they were beaten and why they were beaten. And Storm were an experienced team that ultimately showed their experience on the biggest day. And the boys were really locked in on learning that lesson and being a different team the next year. We could feel like it was growing. 2019 was a disappointment. 2020 was a huge success in many ways, but it was a real breakout year for the team where they fell short and they knew that they could do better the year after, and that's what drove them.
How many years did you guys lead up to the grand final loss, miss out on the grand final? Do you know off the top of your head?
Well, 2019 was Ivan's first year back at the club.
Yep.
He was away for the club for 3 or 4 years. He'd been at the club prior to that, where the team made a preliminary final. But 2020 was really the breakout year when they made their first grand final as a group, and yeah, they haven't looked back since. They just love the taste of success and they want to keep at it.
Yeah, and there's such a valuable lesson in that I really want to highlight, because you've gone from some pretty devastating losses. You lost Ivan. Ivan's come back. You've come back to another devastating loss. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It kind of feels like in life we can pursue something and fail and fail and fail and fail. And it's not only until I think you said, I think it's the 7th time, that you actually won one, and then you won another one, and then you won another one. So building that momentum wheel is so important. And that's something that the lesson that I take away from that for everyday people is you just have to keep going.
No, I totally agree. And they wanted to become world class. I mentioned that before at the start of 2020. And that was even more of a motivation after 2020 was to become world class. We ended up facing the Storm in a prelim. That's the match before the grand final the following year. And that felt every bit of a grand final to revenge the year earlier. And yeah, it just felt like at the time we weren't going to lose.
All right, I'd love to change gears here very quickly a little bit. And I want to talk, if I may, more about you personally. In your opinion, what are the next big breakthroughs in sports science that will trickle through to the public domain that will help everyday people think differently about human performance and their longevity?
I think probably the most obvious one is continuous monitoring, right? So an example of that might be an Oura ring, where someone wears a device which can measure their sleep. Another example is a Whoop band. Most smartwatches these days have the ability to measure your sleep, your heart rate. The 24-hour monitoring of yourself and your output, whether that be your activity or your heart rate, the number of steps, that is just going to explode in my personal opinion. And it could start incorporating things like continuous glucose monitoring in terms of how the food you're eating affects your insulin levels. And I think that is going to be probably the next stage of your everyday athlete is going to want to know more and more and more information about their own body, which can, in my opinion, only be a positive thing for people to be more aware of their day-to-day habits, which are going to, ultimately going to...
I definitely think the technology in the fitness industry has, in the past 5 years, exploded. I mean, you talk about the Oura rings, and everyone these days has got a smartwatch. And if you think just even 5-10 years ago, the technology that was in place for ongoing tracking and monitoring for people, something as simple as a heart rate. Everyone used to have to wear the old school heart bands. And I think moving into a sort of new age of where we're going, the understanding of how our bodies work and at an optimum state through technology will only assist that. We see that here on a daily basis, that is playing such a big role. Everyone now has got a Fitbit or an iWatch or something along those lines to help monitor. So that's great that from a professional point of view, you align that with the way that the industry is going as well. Are there any evidence-based tips that for someone who does want to live a longer, healthier, wealthier life, but doesn't know where to start, anything that you can say outside of eat well and train in relation to the mindset that they go into a new journey of their health and wealth status that you might not be given from a personal trainer or a life coach or a doctor?
It's going to be pretty boring advice. I mean, you mentioned nutrition and you mentioned physical activity, which two of the big pillars. Sleep could be the most important pillar. And ultimately, the mindset should be around how am I going to be still achieving those things in 10 years' time? How am I still going to be achieving those things in 20 years' time? And ultimately, that will result in improved longevity. If there's something that's going to prevent me from being active in 10 or 20 years' time, that is likely going to be my downfall. So in order to prepare yourself to be able to be doing these things, nutrition-wise, activity-wise, and sleep-wise, in 10 or 20 years' time, you're going to be in a pretty good place.
One of the things that, you've thrown out so much great advice for everyone tonight, and I do want to ask you on a personal capacity, what's the best advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
It's a very good, deep question. I don't know if it was necessarily advice, but one of my favourite quotes that I read in a book when I was a teenager was, I think it was a Wayne Bennett book actually. So it was funny, in a rugby league book when I was a teenager in high school. There was a quote which went, "Worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere." And that really stuck with me and resonated with me for a couple of reasons. But I mean, recently I've been thinking about why that's the case. And one of the reasons is it's another way of saying that you should focus on the controllables and not necessarily the uncontrollables. So don't worry about the stuff that you can't control. If there's something you can control, by all means go and do that and focus your energy there, but don't worry about the other stuff.
What are you personally hungry for? You talk about, coming back to, okay, where do I want to be in 10 years? And this isn't really a where do you want to be in 5 years question, but more of a what are you hungry and ambitious for personally over the next 6 and 12 months, both personally and professionally? As a world-leading expert, let me pick your brain. What are you hungry for?
That's a good question. A lot of the satisfaction that I get out of my job is helping other people and supporting team success. So on a daily basis, that could be as simple as designing a training session which is going to make the coaches happy that we've trained at a high intensity and happy that we've achieved our outcomes for the day. But from an athlete point of view, they're feeling like they're improving and they're feeling like they're enjoying themselves and they feel like they're working really, really hard. And when you multiply that across 50 training sessions in a preseason, I'm hungry to experience that again and experience the sense of satisfaction and joy that people get out of a really good preparation for an NRL season. So in terms of the next 6 months, that's what I'm focused on. The next 12 months is one in a row. And that's what we spoke about earlier, but it's so true that you just want to keep feeling that sense of success. And I know it's a form of success that you can't really control. You could be a really good sports scientist in a team that's not winning, but ultimately the feeling that you get when you're contributing to a successful program is really, really rewarding.
What do you think, both personally and professionally, are your biggest achievements to date? Do you look at the 4 in a row as I was a part of that and that's the biggest achievement? Or do you go into that viewpoint and think, it was great to be part of it, but for me personally, this is what I got out of something else in the season or something else at another time? I mean, I'm so curious because you've done and achieved a lot, and what does that look like to you?
Well, I've been at the Panthers for 9 seasons now, which, to answer your question, that feels like a success in itself. Longevity in sport at an organisation isn't all that common, so I feel a sense of success in terms of the amount of good relationships that I've forged at the club, in terms of people obviously trust what I do. They enjoy the team that we've built, and that is rewarding in terms of, working with coaches, working with players, and feeling that sense of community, the sense of being part of something bigger than yourself and contributing to team success. That's how I feel.
That's quite a romantic gesture in the nicest way. Being that I've known you for quite a long time, and being that I knew you when you're 18, I'm very interested to hear, if you were to meet your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
I got some advice in my early 20s when I was working the floor of a gym at the university that I attended. There was a member there. He was in his early 90s at the time, so he's not with us anymore, but his name was Dave, and he pestered me all the time about ensuring that I really knew where I wanted to get to. He said, "What are you going to be doing in 10 years?" And I was giving the old answer, I don't know, like a bit embarrassed about potentially confirming what my goals or aspirations might have been. But he just didn't let up, and he wanted to know exactly what my goals were and exactly how I wanted to get there. He wanted a roadmap for me to be written out. he had no vested interest in me apart from just wanting the best. And while I never gave it to him what my plan was, I did do that activity on my own. And if I had a 18-year-old me in front of me, I would have probably given him advice, or that advice, 5 years earlier. That's probably something which really helped me at the time, because I was approaching the end of my university, my 3-year degree, and if I hadn't have knuckled down at that time, I wouldn't have been given the opportunities I was in terms of trying to progress my education or get opportunities in the industry. So I was lucky that it came at a really good time, but if I had my 18-year-old self, it might have been safer to give that advice a little bit earlier. Yeah. Now, I've known you since you were a young, responsible 18-year-old, so what advice would you give yourself, mate?
Oh, mate. You know what? I think I would highlight that. I think if I was standing in front of my 18-year-old self, and this is advice that I actually want to share with everyone, because I think we're all guilty of this. I would say to myself, think bigger. Because you get everything that you wanted. In detail. We have a way of manifesting our own things, especially if you are a type of person that, like we've touched on tonight, visualises and writes stuff down and prepares for it and does all the work. You get everything you want. So think bigger. You know, life is fleeting and short, so it's important to live it to the max. And I would really reiterate to anyone listening as well, think bigger, because we're not here for a long time, and there's nothing worse on this planet than wasted potential and talent. And it's even more hurtful when you know if you've potentially wasted talent, your own talent or potential. So think bigger. Coming back to you very quickly, I want to ask you a question on a bigger scale. What do you think is next for the NRL? What does the future of the NRL look like?
I think the NRL's hoping to become a truly national game to start with enough teams to warrant that, not just along the eastern seaboard, but over in Perth, the international game in Papua New Guinea.
Yep. Is there any kind of inside word on that? Like, do you know, is that going ahead? Because there's kind of been discussions around that, but has there been, everyone on the planet knows that every single person wants the Bears back. Mostly me. You know, I'm a diehard North Sydney Bears fan. Obviously, greatest club that's ever played the game. Billy Moore, Rookie of the Year, 1989, favourite player. But one of the Bears coming back to what's happening with Papua New Guinea, but you also talk about an international game. But there looks to, if you think about the rugby game, not rugby league, but there's Argentina, there's Japan, there's even American and Canadian teams. Is there sort of wider goals for that to be where NRL's going, or is it going to be more sort of the Oceania area?
Well, I think the NRL, and rightly so, wants to really nail down the Pacific region. And you see now that probably 50% of NRL players have some kind of heritage from other Pacific nations other than Australia. So whether it's New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, it's really a stronghold for rugby league, and they need to make sure that they own that area. So that's definitely, it appears to be one of the priorities. They're dabbling over in America with the Vegas trip for the second year in a row, which we're lucky enough to be on. We might need someone to come and help if you're interested, but
sign me up.
That's obviously something strategic where they're trying to appeal to a wider audience, and I do think that, like you said, it's important to be bold, and they're definitely being bold. It's probably going to take a long time to really crack another international market, but yeah, they're being pretty ambitious there.
Right. So this brings me to essentially our last question of the night, and what I want to know is, what's next for Dr. Tom Lovell?
What's next? Well, I'll continue to enjoy my off-season with my 3 beautiful daughters and beautiful wife, Christy. So that's definitely the priority over the next couple of weeks. And then after that, we're back into the office and we start planning again. We go again and We've got some young boys coming into train in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm really excited to help them on their journey to become NRL players and potentially contribute to the next Premiership. Our senior guys don't come back for a little bit more time after that, but that's the immediate future is, focus on family next couple of weeks and then back to work.
Then one in a row.
One in a row.
Mate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think we've all taken something away from it. Everything you're doing is absolutely incredible. I'm proud as punch of you, so congrats on all your achievements and success. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap up for today's session. Dr. Tom Lovell from the Penrith Panthers. Thank you so much. We will see you next episode.